Natural Order Podcast, Episode 12. Welcome to the Natural Order Podcast with your hosts, Brian O'Leary and Adam Haman. Welcome back to Natural Order Podcast. It's been a bit of a delay, but I'm Brian O'Leary here with you, with Adam Haman as always, and, welcome, Adam.
Hey, Brian. Good to talk to you as always.
You too. And today we had in mind, we want to talk about vote by mail and how that applies to everything we've talked about in this show. And so with lack of anything else really to say about it, what you hear with vote by mail is that people like it. People like just filling out their ballot, drinking their coffee, and having all this time to kind of really go over the issues and the candidates, and they can fill it out at their kitchen table. And so people like it.
Yeah, I like it as well for all those reasons.
Yeah.
Which I want to get admit to right up front,
Okay.
because I'm going to be ripping this concept to shreds momentarily. But what you just said, I like that quite a bit as well. You got plenty of time to do the research. It's comfortable. You can think about it. It's great.
And thus it's easier, right? So it's
Much
easier to vote. So that's people like it because it's easier, I guess. And people vote for when they're allowed to vote by mail versus going to the ballot box, it seems to win in large margins. Meaning that the general populace with their margins seems to be like what most people like. However, after doing some research, because I come from the state of Oregon, where we've had, or I don't live there anymore, but we had vote by mail. I think the first vote by mail where you couldn't go to the ballot box in the late 90s, it got passed. They have had some form of vote by mail essentially since in certain jurisdictions, I think since 1981, but it wasn't universal throughout the state until I believe it was 1999. Again, it was that. So that vote was actually vetoed. It was in the state government, brought to the governor, and it was actually vetoed by Democratic Governor John Kitzhaber in 1997, which shocked me when I heard that because, I think something we can get into later, but also the large margins. I think it was passed by with a 66% yes vote in Oregon, but my theory is always you take away the big cities and things are totally different, but you still have to deal with the big cities. So,
as a quick aside, I think in general we should be wary of things that pass like this by popular referendum. You have to read the referendum. Very rarely will they say what the full costs of the proposal are. They'll always tell you, do you want to vote for this? But they won't, like, for example, do you want to build a stadium for the Raiders, to use a hated personal example in my life? And it's like, yeah. But, what exactly does that cost? And what impacts in your economy are these costs going to have?
Right.
Let's say you shift the burden to hotel guests, as they did here. I think they did here. What impact is that going to have on things? So there's just no way in the world that a 2-inch written out referendum in your voter guide is going to really explain the details, the nuts and bolts, the long-term knock-on effects of the proposal. And this is no different.
Right.
Yeah, sure. I love universal mail-in balloting. It's so convenient, unless we really start digging into the ramifications.
Yeah. And that's something we will certainly get into in a moment. But
no, for the positives, it's easy and it's popular.
And
so that's good.
Yeah. And everything you hear from the news, it's bipartisan support. And that's how I think, I should say, it's not what gets reported, but it's what gets repeated is like, right. So we hear this over and over, right? It's bipartisan. Meanwhile, the bipartisan agenda is to kind of create consensus within their small cabal of like, not being too far left or too far right, and we can agree on this. My opinion, and it's probably well stated over the course of the last couple of years, is that the bipartisan thing doesn't really matter, and it's all kind of a huge leftward drift. So they're just
it's another overarching piece of advice. Anytime you hear the mainstream or the corporate media saying something like that, framing it that way, bipartisan support, much like the unprovoked attack in Ukraine by Russia.
That's
just never say that thing without saying unprovoked. That's weird. Why are you inserting that descriptor in every single time you mention it?
Yeah, and
maybe it's because it's not true. Maybe it's a narrative, and maybe the bipartisan support is also a narrative.
It's what's repeated. It is reported, but certain things that are reported are not repeated. We hear the bipartisan, we hear unprovoked, like what you're saying, and therefore the general masses who the vote by mail is trying to appeal to say, yeah, we need to do vote by mail. Well, they hear what's repeated. They think it's great. People like it. It's easier. People vote for it by large margins, and it's bipartisan. So here we go. That's what we got, and everybody loves it. You're a stupid, backwards rube if you like going to the polling place. And the polling place, I think there was an interview with one of the Oregon politicians who was really behind this. I saw it on and we'll link to it in the show notes, hopefully. Kiesling, I think it was. He was a former Speaker of the House or some crap like that in Oregon. And he said the polling place is the biggest form or instance, or I can't remember the exact words, but like I said, we'll have it in the show notes, of voter suppression. There is.
Yep.
Because people are intimidated to vote. I mean, so my point is, I don't know if that's true. It's repeated over and over. I don't know if that's true. I kind of doubt it, because it's not the 1860s where you had your vote was public and people shamed you mercilessly if you didn't vote for whatever candidate was popular. And there's a good movie, actually.
I heard that man make the argument. I heard the man make the argument. Do you know what he means? I don't even know what he means. What's intimidating about going to a polling place?
Well, the theory being is that you will be attacked and shamed. Again,
I've never seen anything like that.
We don't know. Like, yeah, it's a scare tactic. But there was a movie, actually, and I didn't think about it until right now. It's called Copperhead. I don't know if you've seen this. It takes place
I saw that.
around the Civil War era, or in the Civil War era, and it's in upstate New York. And so anyway, the point is that back then, as we're told in school, I don't know how true it is, but we're told it in school, so let's stipulate that it is true, that everybody had their vote out in public and everybody could see who the other person voted for. And this guy, the Copperhead, he just was against the Civil War, against Union aggression in the South. It wasn't necessarily like he was a pro-Confederate sympathizer. He just didn't want the Union to go to war.
He favored a more peaceful solution to whatever this issue was.
Shockingly. Yeah. And he got shamed and tarred and feathered, I want to say. I can't remember exactly. It was several years ago since I've seen the movie. But anyway, so that is voter intimidation. But he stuck to his guns.
I don't see too much of that in my life.
It doesn't happen. But the theory being is that if you do it at the piece of having your own morning coffee and filling it out while you read the Sunday newspaper, then everything's good. But that's fantasy too, because how many people read the Sunday newspaper on their coffee, and drink their coffee on the kitchen table anymore? It's rare. But anyway, sorry to go on for too long, Adam. Did you have a rebuttal or would like to?
I hate everything about it.
Okay.
I hate everything about it.
Even though you love it and it's easy.
Even though I love it. Some people say it leads to rampant fraud. And the people who support it just poo-poo that idea like it's just nonsense.
Yeah.
Well, I don't see how it couldn't be filled with fraud. Everything about it leaves the door wide open for fraud, and you can't do anything about it. Just for one example, I don't even need to fill out my own ballot. You're talking about sitting around the coffee table. Maybe the whole family just gives all their ballots to one guy, and then he fills them out. You'll never know.
The argument from the other side would say, well, you just committed a felony, and you might have just committed three felonies.
You bring that argument up, and they say that's stupid. That's so stupid that you would even think that, because somebody who did that would be committing a felony. Well, how in the world are they ever going to get caught? Ever.
The percentages are small, negligible, or non-existent.
Let me give you a brief example. In 2020, when we changed the voting systems all across the country just immediately by fiat and switched to universal mail-in balloting, just in my little cul-de-sac, in my neighbors, 6 ballots got sent out that were not valid for one reason or another. The person either didn't live there, or they'd moved out of state, or dead in one case. one lady claimed to have gotten one for her pet. She didn't show it, so maybe she was exaggerating. But the point being, all you have to do is fill that in and drop it in a mailbox, and you've committed this ostensible felony. But how in the world is that ever going to get caught? How are you ever going to get prosecuted?
Well, they match signatures.
No, they don't. And you know how I know?
Yeah.
You know how I know that, Brian? Because I have seen a human being make their signature before. Mm-hmm. It's never consistent.
Right.
One of two things has to be going on. They're either turning down the authentication so loosely that anybody, just by looking at somebody's driver's license or seeing a check, canceled check, can forge the signature and pass it, or, which is much more likely what's going on, they've got those dials turned so loose or so tight. I mean, imagine to catch the fraud you're talking about, they'd have to turn those dials up so high in the automated process that you'd reject half the ballots. Because
you'd have to.
Think of all the people you know, especially people my age. Do they make their signature the same every time? Are they making it the same as they did in their driver's license when it was recorded for these rolls?
No.
Of course not. So they're saying they're using this mechanism to prevent fraud, and it can't be true. Technically, it cannot be the case.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and I was gonna say, like, if you take what my signature was when I first started voting, and you compare it to now, it's totally different. Now, if you took it from, the first year to the second year to the third year to the, so on and down the line, you wouldn't see much difference year to year. But as my handwriting changes and whatever, like, the speed, like more.
The speed, how much coffee you had
totally
before they'd either have to turn it so loose that they let everything in, or turn it so tight that you get 10% of the ballots accepted. So they're just spinning you a lie. They should literally
laugh at me if they match my signature, and I can't do a thing about it because it's the way I write. Right? They match my signature from 20 years ago or 25 years ago or whatever it was. And I mean, compared to now, like it's different. And
the last time I voted here in Nevada, whatever it was, last year, I guess, I went into the polling place and signed the electric keypad, the
like with your
electronic
finger?
Signing space, just with whatever it was, a stylus.
Yeah, okay.
But it looked nothing like the signature that they have recorded. Nothing.
Because
and guess what? My vote got counted.
Yeah, I can pay for things with credit card when I sign my thing with my finger on those pads. It looks nothing like, well, I shouldn't say nothing. It looks somewhat like something I would write, but I don't have the space. I don't have the same tool, the same writing tool.
Yeah, it's silly. So that should be viewed with suspicion. And the defenders of universal mail-in ballot out just say the words signature verification as if we're just supposed to go, oh, well, I guess it's solved, and I guess that's just not a problem. And I don't believe it. But I think the bigger problem, there's many big problems, is
but they do reject some ballots. They reject enough ballots to keep the ruse going, I guess.
They reject it for things like it has the wrong address on it. I mean, they check it against something.
Yeah.
But if you know the person's address, and why wouldn't you, let's say you swipe their ballot or something.
Yeah.
Or just, maybe the person that got sent a ballot is elderly and they're not firing in all cylinders, and you've got a hold of their ballot. Well, you can fill that out.
So what about,
there's a significant percentage of the population for whom that's possible. And if elections matter, are we supposed to believe that people aren't incentivized to cast an extra vote when, if you don't, either you're going to elect Hitler or you're going to elect Joseph Stalin?
Right.
So
what are the other objections? I think it's a reasonable objection, actually. I'd be interested to hear your point, is that if there was such mass fraud on the scale that we're kind of intimating that there might be, there would be evidence.
Why? The system is opaque, and it's designed to be opaque, so why would there be evidence?
This is the objection I'm laying out.
Oh, okay, sorry.
Yeah. No, but yeah, your reaction is quite reasonable.
Yeah, why would there be evidence?
Right.
It's not designed to be.
I guess that's the case because it's not really a mass fraud. It's a lot of tiny frauds going on a mass level that's not...
it's undetectable.
Yeah, it's undetectable.
It's undetectable. I mean, we have a principle in this country, as you alluded to earlier, of secret voting, and keeping that principle in place sort of means that the system is kind of opaque. And then you've got all the objections. You can't audit the software. We don't really know that these machines are truly untamperable, and of course they're not. Good Lord! I mean, all you'd have to do is bribe one tech, right?
Right.
He's trying to tell me the KGB couldn't infiltrate this system by kidnapping one person's daughter? Come on. And we can't audit it after the fact. It's unauditable.
But you'll get sent to jail for even saying that. Your free speech rights.
If you even bring up the objection in the wrong way. Yeah, you might find yourself in jail. So yeah, I think it's a huge problem. But I mean, as people who've listened to us before know, I'm not a big fan of democracy to begin with.
Mm-hmm.
I think there's an enormous problem with the unrestrained ability to walk into a voting booth and just vote yourself a piece of somebody else's wealth.
Yeah, that's a huge problem, and I guess
it's a form of force, right? It's larceny.
Let's address that real quick, because one of the biggest arguments in favor of vote by mail is like more people get to vote, more people get to exercise their supposed right to vote. Now, first of all, I'm not sure that we have the right to vote. I would, if we do, with rights become responsibilities, but I believe it's a privilege more than anything to, and I don't even know what kind of privilege, but be that as it may, the advantage is that you get a large turnout. But as I kind of stated or intimated at least earlier, with a large turnout, you get a lot of people who just will vote and not be critical about it at all. They'll vote based on what they heard repeated. They're not. It's not a critical mindset when it comes to voting. And then the other objection I would typically have is like, does your vote really matter? In the large scheme of things, statistically, probably not. The smaller, obviously, like if you're voting within a family structure or something, 3 versus 2, that third vote's pretty huge, but we're not dealing with that on a regular basis.
Yeah, the thing that they're so proud of, the fact that it increases voter participation, is a bug, not a feature.
I agree.
Because as you say, the marginal voter probably shouldn't. Someone there should be a cost of voting. There should be some friction.
But
the
objection to that is that they call you a racist.
Well, I didn't bring up race, so what ideas do you have about minority classes that makes you think they don't care enough to show up and vote? Right. That sounds like your prejudice, not mine. Absent criticizer of my racism. I mean, I obviously there were problems with the system that only allowed land-owning white males to vote. That's ripe for fraud and abuse too. But in general, I think there should be some friction.
Right. And
if you can't be bothered to get yourself educated on the issues and show up at a polling place and show an ID, and cast your vote, maybe you shouldn't be voting. Maybe on the margin, we'd have less problems if that were the case.
Mm-hmm.
And again, yeah, it's a form of abuse, force, and theft to just walk into a voting booth and be able to vote anything.
Right.
We really should talk about, not you and I, Brian, but as we're examining, voting procedures and what democracy means, we should remind ourselves that it's the initiation of force oftentimes to cast a vote, to cast a ballot. You should think about that.
I like that idea, that word friction, because what happened I think the general argument now in favor of vote by mail is like, it's absentee balloting. It's absentee balloting universal. But no, not really, because absentee ballots did exactly what you said. They added a little friction to the process. Now, if
you had to ask for the ballot,
you had to ask for it.
Yeah, no, I think that makes all the difference in the world. I have no problem with absentee balloting, except for the fact that it got us here. But yeah, if you're out of the country or you're sick or you have a reason, crippled or something, write in or get online with your Secretary of State and ask for an absentee ballot. I have no problem with that.
Right.
But just sending all those ballots out to whatever names and addresses are in your system's voter rolls, no matter how out of date they are, to be filled out by you do not know who. And again, don't give me that signature verification trope as some sort of preventative to fraud, because it's nonsense. You're just throwing these ballots out into the whirlwind and just accepting whatever comes back. Is like, well, I guess we had an election.
I have a hard enough time with a small email and mailing list to get those addresses, whether they're emails and physical addresses, correct. And how many pieces of mail will bounce back in a typical campaign? Yeah, you get some that bounce back, but like, if they're just trying to deliver ballots, what's the incentive for them to say, oh, this person doesn't live here, we don't know if he lives here anymore? That's probably more rare than just the U.S. Postal Service putting that yellow sticker on.
One of the revelations of the last handful of years, more if you were paying attention, is that a lot of the systems and institutions and structures that we put our faith in and trust in seem to have some sort of problem. They're corrupt, they're broken, things go wrong. But not the election system in all 50 states. It's the darndest thing. Well, those things work perfectly. No matter how bad the potholes are on your street, or how screwed up the DMV is, or the problems we have with the post office, and all, it looks like the people at City Hall are just insane or possibly mentally disabled. But no, don't worry. Our voting system, that's flawless. Lucky us, because it's so important,
Yeah, and you mentioned something earlier, and kind of moved on here and there, but I think it's worth going back to. You talked about voting yourself stuff or something to that degree. Like, you just walk in and it's like how it's theft, and then, well, let me put it this way. I do not agree at all with the ability for tax, essentially receivers of tax money being able to vote.
Yes.
To give themselves. So that should eliminate, and this is not vote by mail, but it does have something to do with it, because when you increase the franchise, you increase the amount of people who are net tax receivers, or benefit of tax receipts, as opposed to people who pay out. But people, quote unquote, public employees should not be able to vote on a levy that raises the taxes on others. That's insane.
Agreed.
That is insane. But it happens. It's like people who send. Anyway, go ahead.
It worked for a little while when we had a culture that more or less universally believed that stealing was immoral, that it was wrong.
Yeah.
You could sort of get away with the fact that your rights that could not be voted away, weren't really precisely defined. That's how we got an income tax, thrown in to begin with. But how popular do you think this hypothetical ballot proposal would be? What we're going to do, Brian, if this passes, is everybody is going to take all their wealth, all their stuff, cut it in half, and send half into the state to be put into a huge big pot, And then what we're going to do is take all that wealth and divide it up by the populace and spread it out, to minimize inequality and, help out struggling people. You think that would pass? I do.
Yeah, I would. Yeah.
And what principle
because
is being
that's
violated?
Actually an easier
it's
way
an equal tax. It's one half. Everybody's paying the same rate.
Yeah. It's an easier
why wouldn't that
way
pass?
Of saying the same
and what
thing.
would we? Yeah, what objection would be made as to why that would be wrong?
Gosh, don't give them ideas. Like that's almost too easy.
Pretty sure they have this one already. But like when I say things like voting is theft, people will say, well, you're just being hyperbolic. But no, it isn't. What you're doing is you might as well be walking into people's houses with a gun. Mm-hmm. That's what you're doing. And I wish we didn't have that ethos. I wish we didn't think it was okay to just say, well, I'm going to force my people to pay for a stadium for the Oakland A's again, for just purely random example that doesn't irritate me at all.
Right.
Why should people who hate baseball and crowds and congested infrastructure on the roads, why should we have to pay for that or suffer through it? You're casting a vote as you jacking your neighbor for things they don't want to pay for.
Right.
You should get angry about it.
Yeah, and I guess when I was growing up, it was like, well, our city just doesn't put enough money into they let the stadiums go into disrepair, but then we had in Portland anyway, the owner we had a AAA baseball team. The owner in the, I want to say late 80s, early 90s, he said, all right, well, you're not gonna pay for, like, honestly, safety stuff, but it didn't matter because they're playing and paying rent to this government-owned grift operation in downtown Portland. But so he said, all right, fine, we're just going to move to Salt Lake City, and you guys are not going to have a team. People were mad. I mean, we'd have baseball, more or less, professional baseball for, I think at that point, 70, 80, 90 years in Portland. So people were rightfully mad, but, what are you going to do? Like, pay the ransom? Mm-hmm. That's like a terrorist operation. Then, another group comes in and they bring a single A team in a couple years later. And that went remarkably well. And then like, oh, Portland can actually support baseball. So what do? They jack up another levy and say, all right, we're going to renovate the stadium now. So they renovate the stadium to the tunes of tens of millions of dollars. And the stadium actually becomes worse for baseball. But guess what? They can actually have soccer there now, too. So baseball, I don't know, baseball, we're a soccer town. So, and then the MLS gets big and they're like, all right, we're going to spend hundreds of millions of dollars making this a soccer only stadium. Sorry, baseball. And now they've got a great soccer stadium. Really nice. But to the tune of hundreds of millions of dollars that goes right in the pocket of, guess who the owner of the Portland Timbers Soccer Club is, Adam?
Why don't you let us know?
The son of Hank Paulson. Funny how that goes.
All the same people.
Yeah, all the same
finding
people.
Their way to get their pockets underneath the spigot of government money.
Yeah.
What do you think about this compromise? Because, hey, I wouldn't mind filling out my ballot. Oh, well, first of all, the way you are supposed to enjoy deciding your voting issues over your coffee at the kitchen table is you're supposed to take the sample voter ballot and do all your research ahead of time. So you've got it all filled out and you can take that with you to the polling place and mark it up there. But you've always been allowed to do your thinking ahead of time, ladies and gentlemen.
And you can bring your checklist or
you're allowed to, you're allowed to see what the ballot measures are before going to the polling place.
Test.
It's the darndest thing.
It's an open book.
It's the darndest thing. Yes, exactly. But if you wanted, I don't think you should, but we could ameliorate some of this problem if you just expanded absentee ballot, the process, like suggested to the citizenry somehow that, they become the custom that you every year or every election cycle, you request a ballot and then take it to the polling place and have your DNA checked or
whatever.
Have the attendee put their white rubber glove on and give you a full investigation to make sure you are who you are.
Moon River.
I wouldn't object to that necessarily, but just spewing these ballots out and then just accepting whatever comes back. No honest person can say they're okay with that and not think it's susceptible to massive fraud. They just must be assuming they're on the receiving end of it.
Here's one more objection that I'm interested to hear your perspective on because, I'll let you talk on it first. But so in order to go to the ballot, the ballot box, the voting, whatever, what do they call it? The precinct. In order to go to the precinct, I have to take time off work. It's on a Tuesday. Almost every election here is on a Tuesday, right? Some random, I don't know why they do it on Tuesday. But you got
here in Vegas, you've got 2 or 3 weeks to do it.
To go to the polling place?
Yes. Okay. Yes. It's not one day.
We'll say
it's every day.
Yeah.
For 2 or 3 weeks. You can go whenever the hell you want.
Okay. Yeah.
I mean, that's not hard.
Right.
They're little pop-up stands, you put them in a
So they could do that. That's an easy
parking
solution.
lot of an Albertsons. Yeah, it's simple.
Easy solution.
It's not crowded. It's not a long line. You're in and out. It's not hard.
Yeah, because when I was growing up, I remember like voting day would be in the gym at our school, right? Like literally like the next room down from my classroom. And like all these adults are like traipsing through the hallways, going to their, like, what in the heck? And so.
And long lines, right?
Long lines. Yeah. And they're doing it all day and going in. But again, it's not crowded. It just happens to be the precinct. I don't know why they did it there, but so the objection simply is, let's say it's not like Vegas, where it is just one day. You have voting day, Tuesday, whatever Tuesday it is, depending on the election. I have to take an hour off of work, a half hour off of work, 3 hours off of work, depending on the lines. I might be late for coming back to my work. I might get fired for not showing up because I had to vote.
Sounds like you got a bad boss.
Well, yeah, you do have a bad boss, but knowing this ahead of time, if that is your objection, I think that's where the absentee ballot comes in. You have to ask, that's the simple solution to that. Sure. It's not just giving you the ballot. You have to want to do it and need to do it and think it a part of your civic duty or something. But the friction, I think.
It's that friction we were talking about. I think it's important to have friction in the system because, again, more people voting just because means you get more of the marginal voters. And who are they?
Yeah.
They don't know nothing. They weren't that interested to vote to begin with.
It's interesting, too, because you talk about friction and then, I think it was Alexander Hamilton said one of the features of like the British government was the corruption. And we have this corruption that's not a feature, but the friction in our system is a feature. And, the friction is constantly going between, is it corrupt? Is it not corrupt? I don't know. But the downright corruption and, likely, I'd say, fraud that occurs on a regular basis with these vote by mail. And, who knows? I think it's easier probably in a, precinct to say, because people will just drop the vote in. They don't have that envelope that you have to sign because naturally, if people like see who it is, you could just pick that ballot out. Like, oh, I know O'Leary. He's gonna vote, down the ticket this way for everyone. Let's just take his vote out of there. We'll say we counted it, put it in, but we'll just not put it. We'll take it out of that envelope. We registered it on the barcode. We'll just take it out of the envelope, toss it. Not to say that people know who I am or who you are or who other people are who, have an idea on how you'll vote. But there's enough of that, or theoretically enough of that could easily.
They don't even have to know you personally. I mean, you can just look at a person's zip code and have some sort of an idea,
Yeah.
And the fundamental principle is that if you have an opaque system where the stakes are high, and then you're going to be getting corruption. It's inevitable.
Right.
Maybe it didn't happen this time.
Right.
But it will happen. So think like a systems engineer and design a system that's not susceptible to that.
Yeah. And I don't know if I mentioned it earlier in the show, but when I was making notes for doing this, a book I read, I guess a while ago now, probably a year ago, it's called Rigged by Mollie Hemingway. She's a DC reporter. And so the argument essentially in that book is that the election of 2020 was rigged. Now, you can't really find smoking gun evidence. It's people like, oh, no smoking gun evidence. So, and then all these, reports, that didn't really happen. But like, that doesn't really matter to me anyway. Like, because it's in the water, I guess that this, like people really don't want so-and-so to win or so-and-so to win or this ballot measure to pass. Usually it's candidates, but whatever. But the thing is, it can happen on the small level like you talked about. Like it's micro frauds that are actually what these people who rail against it are felonies. But certain people get caught and certain people don't get caught. And it's very, very disturbing.
And since we have an opaque system, I mean, let us not forget in December of 2015, every Democrat told you that the election was stolen, that we don't have fair elections in America. Remember? Remember, guys? So
no, 2016.
December of 2015, after the election.
2016.
Oh, you're right. I flipped it back the wrong year.
Yeah,
no, you're right.
Yeah. Because he takes office in January 2017.
Yeah.
There is an odd even thing that bothers me. Like the guy gets elected in one year and then it takes office in the next. But anyway, go ahead.
Well, the point being, the stakes are so high that nobody is going to believe an election system that isn't transparent.
Right.
Whoever loses is going to insist that either outright fraud occurred or Russia interfered or it was Julian Assange somehow, and then there's the influence of public opinion that is bragged about, like to make sure Trump didn't win a second term, media influencers, and, they were bragging in whatever, was it the Washington Post? I can't remember, but yeah, they bragged that they influenced what was going on in social media to make sure that the right narratives were promoted and the wrong ones were suppressed.
Not what's
like
reported,
the Hunter Biden laptop story,
repeated,
for example.
What is repeated? What is repeated? Yeah, the Hunter laptop. Gosh, I mean, I think we talked about that a while ago, but I mean, it
doesn't pertain to this issue,
to this,
except that it's related to elections more broadly. But yeah, I think we need to abandon this universal mail-in balloting, and I also think we need to get rid of the very stupid idea that for something as ostensibly important as your vote, you shouldn't have to prove who you are.
Right.
It's
Somehow or another. I don't know.
Somehow.
I don't know how that will go down in this day and age. Like when, seemingly you could do the same thing and just get an ID theoretically. But yeah, there's no standards really. I guess is maybe the biggest issue. There's no real standard on like what it means to vote, because we go back to the Federalist type system where its power devolved lower and lower and lower, and it should be like at the precinct level is where they do all the investigating. It's not at the federal level or even the state level to look at that ID or prove who you are. It should be at the literal precinct level. But with the vote by mail stuff, the precincts are gone. I mean, maybe there's like some code or something that you belong to some precinct, but I don't know in most places if that's even true anymore. And so there's like nobody's come to check on me for almost 30 years. I've never had anybody check.
No, of course not. If you're going to have anybody investigate fraud, it should be done at the more local, the better. Like it's easier to solve a murder in a small village than a huge city, right?
Yeah.
If you're trying to figure out if votes are missing or somebody's screwing around, wouldn't it be better to like have it be your local precinct where pretty much everybody knows? Like, what if my precinct was my street or my cul-de-sac?
And sometimes that's going to be
pretty easy.
And sometimes the precinct stuff is going to be super corrupt. No doubt about it.
Could be.
And like,
Could be.
I mean, you just go to back to people of my heritage. They like to rig elections pretty nicely back in the old days. With the Irish folks were not afraid to rig elections in certain areas, but the mass fraud can only it can't get much further than their circle, and then people know it, and then they get theoretically get prosecuted for being on. But it's like when you have these politicians,
a decentralized system is much more anti-fragile.
Yeah, when you have these politicians say, "Oh, he filled out a ballot for somebody else. He's now a felon." Well, I mean, come on. Like, what did the Italian and Irish mobs do for years? They
Right.
syndicated all these votes for people, and they didn't even know. They literally paid people to vote. Literally paid people. I mean,
what does it matter in an opaque system?
Andrew Jackson did the same thing. He paid people. Or his
what does
campaign.
it matter in an opaque system to threaten people with a felony?
No.
Since it's so easy to do and not get caught, who cares that it's a
matter
felony?
of fact? I think I even know. I could be wrong, but I think I know somebody that either went to jail or certainly got a fine for filling out his wife's ballot and saying something about it.
What did he do? Admit to it?
Yeah. Well, that was the dumb part, right? Yeah.
Okay, you got me. If you admit to it and testify against yourself in trial, okay.
Yeah. But, I mean, it can happen. Like, it can happen, but you can't be that, well, anyway, just don't. But the nice thing about it, I guess, Adam, is that most of these people who are on the side of vote by mail, they keep their mouth shut. They do it anyway, and they keep their mouth shut. So we don't know.
Yeah, we won't know. That's the biggest problem. I mean, so the last two presidential elections, we've had a pretty big uproar in the populace on one side or the other that the election wasn't fair.
Mm-hmm.
What's going to happen this next time? Because nothing has happened to make the systems in the various states any more fair. What's going to happen?
Yeah, I don't know. All I know is
whoever loses is going to have riots in the street, I presume. Or
what they'll have is a better argument than they did the previous election that it's not fair. Just building on past.
Well, they won't have any
events.
evidence, though. The evidence is not findable by design.
But if you keep repeating, you have a better argument.
Well, the fact that what I find MAGA type people screaming that they know the election is rigged and they have the receipts here. Let me show you this link. I say, your link doesn't actually lead to proof. You're stretching things and using hyperbole, which is bad for your argument. And you have such a better argument at your disposal. The system isn't trustworthy. The election isn't trustworthy. Therefore, we should not.
It's not trustworthy, yet we trust in elections. And
that's what I'm saying.
And we put
don't claim that you got ripped off. Claim that you could have and no one would know. So why do we have this system? Make that your argument.
Right. You never hear that.
If what you want is election reform, make that your argument.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, all right. I think we should probably leave it there. I think it was good points. I think we're both against vote by mail, and not that any.
Oh no, I love it. Did that come across wrong?
Oh, well, you like doing it, but you're against the whole process.
I'm against the whole process. Yeah. Oh yeah, and those sample ballots are a thing. Let's not forget that.
Yeah,
you can still do your voting by your coffee, making your mind up.
Yeah, so I would just encourage folks to go to Natural Order Podcast, where we'll have show notes for all that, and our Substack page. You can still sign up for there. That'll get you on the list, too. You can find my stuff at briandO'Leary.com. Adam, you got anything you want to plug?
Not at the moment.
Not at the moment, but we're staging, I think.
Staging.
Yeah. All right, guys. Until next week, or whenever we're at this again, hopefully next week. For more, head on over to naturalorderpodcast.com. For show notes on today's episode, head on over to naturalorderpodcast.com/ep12. That's naturalorderpodcast.com/ep12. /EP12.